Cool. Well, I'm really, it's a great honor to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you so much to the organizers for putting on this event virtually. I know that organizing virtual events can sort of present their own kinds of challenges, but it really is a great opportunity for lots of the community to come together. I'm going to be sharing with you, I'd say, a project that is currently ongoing. This is sort of active research that is happening right now, sort of as we speak. And so this is actually a great time to sort of get the word out there and to get feedback from the community in terms of how useful this seems to be and what we can do to sort of maximize its utility. So what I'm going to be talking about today is evaluating the use of a multi-drone system for monitoring rangeland landscapes. And so, as Teresa mentioned, my name is Libby Porzig. I work at Point Blue Conservation Science. So who is Point Blue? We're a nonprofit organization based out of Sonoma County. We've been around since about 1965. And essentially, the work that we do at Point Blue is we support natural resource managers with science, research, and monitoring. And so we are a collection of about 150 or so scientists and other nature and outdoor and agriculture loving people. And we love to study soils. We love to study not just land, but also ocean systems and wildlife. And we're very passionate about helping land stewards take care of our planet. As Teresa mentioned, the group that I work most closely with at Point Blue, many of them are pictured here in this photo, and many of them are here today. So it's great to see everyone in the group. We have a really amazing program started by Wendell Gilgert, a partnership with NRCS that co-hosts partner biologists in NRCS offices around the state. And our partner biologists work on the local level to support conservation planning and help give ecological information to producers by collecting data on things like soils and plants and wildlife on farms and ranches across California. A big focus of our work is rangelands. Rangelands, for reasons that I don't think I need to convince this audience why rangelands are really important and really amazing. And I think that these landscapes are certainly what inspired me to a career in conservation. And part of what makes them so wonderful, their diversity, their beauty, is also what can make them challenging as an ecologist or as a scientist to study. These landscapes they span a lot of climatic regions in California. We have a lot of different topography. We have different soils. We have different vegetation communities, and so they can present challenges for stewardship, both in terms of so they present challenges for stewardship insofar as, the sort of best management or the right management is not necessarily one size fits all. And to that end, collecting data or monitoring these landscapes can help. It can help inform decision making. It can help inform conservation planning. It can help inform management, and it can also help tell the story. One of the challenges in collecting data, ecological data on rangelands is this issue of scale. So we're often interested in questions that are that sort of vary across both a very fine scale and across a very, very big scale. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, for example, we're interested in things like, the amount of bare ground or the amount of cover of different functional groups. And these things vary quite a bit over small spatial scales, but we're not just interested in them on a scale of, a quarter acre or half an acre. We're really interested in these in these questions sort of across the landscape. And in California, we're talking about, often, hundreds and thousands of acres of land. And so it sort of requires, I would say, not just one, but sort of several tools in the toolbox to understand this. And so, and these tools can have, sort of different strengths and trade-offs between them. And so if we sort of think about kind of ends of the spectrum of the kinds of tools that we can use to monitor rangelands, but sort of at one end of the spectrum, I think of this as the sort of boots on the ground. And so this is, on the left-hand side here, I've got a picture of our partner biologist, Corey Shake in Yolo County doing some soil sampling. This is sort of, when we kind of tromp out on the rangeland and we sort of lay the tape, and we drop the pin and we identify the plants, or we dig the hole and we measure the soil, or we count the birds. These intensive empirical kinds of surveys can give us a lot of detailed information about particular places on the landscape. And then to sort of scale that up to the entire landscape, we essentially use some statistical tools to sort of, fill in the gaps or kind of make guesses between sampling points. And so that will have its own strengths and its weaknesses. Then at the other end of the spectrum, we can think about tools such as aerial imagery taken from, airplanes, LiDAR, also satellite imagery that are going to be spatially comprehensive. So that we're able to sort of measure the whole landscape. But then some of the details we're sort of filling in with, ground truth data or other kinds of modeling and interpolation. And so they'll have, their own set of strengths and their own set of trade-offs. And it's not to say that there's any one right way of measuring rangeland. So the methods that we choose and the tools that we use need to be selected based on our goals. But given that many management questions often kind of span these spatial scales, where we want sort of very fine scale information, but we want it across, the entire landscape or on the scale of the landscape, it sort of necessitates, or it sort of means that there's room in the toolbox, or there's a need, for tools that can provide provide information on both of these scales. So drones or unmanned aerial vehicles are something that I would say is in my observation, is a sort of growing area of application for natural resource managers, and particularly in rangelands, because they have the potential to sort of fill a gap in this toolbox. But they do have some challenges. So I will say that we sort of first started using drones essentially as a sort of extension of a sort of point-based measurement. So you hike out on the land and you do your vegetation survey, and then you send a drone up in the sky and you sort of take a picture of that. And then you can use that to compare it to satellite imagery or Google Earth imagery or otherwise. But then if you really want to try to get at this sort of comprehensive nature of studying the landscape, then you need to sort of, take photos or take imagery of the entire landscape with a drone. And that's where things start to get tricky. We need to, you have to sort of keep track of where you're flying things. Images have to be joined together. You also then end up with a ton of images, and you can run into problems of data storage and data curation. And then any sort of automated processing of this imagery can then become computationally intensive. So for a long time, this has sort of had been a kind of limited use or limited application for us. Now, one of the things I really like about working in science is this sort of opportunity to learn and to borrow ideas from other fields or other systems. Potentially things or places that maybe sort of have little bearing on the system or the question at hand. And we had an opportunity to do just that by essentially borrowing some technology and some tools that Point Blue is using in a very different place on Ross at Cape Crozier on Ross Island in Antarctica. So Point Blue has been working in Antarctica with the Adelie penguin since the 1970s. It's been a big part of our organization's work. And as different as the systems may seem, they actually do present a lot of similar challenges. When you're studying penguins, you're interested in questions that span these spatial scales, where we want very detailed information, but we want it across very large spatial scales. And so in this instance, we're interested in counting penguins. And I've always thought that this was so funny to me because, you're on a continent where there's essentially no plants, and like, where are they going to hide? But it's actually surprisingly very difficult to count penguins. And there's about 500,000 of them here at this colony. They move around. These like football-sized birds are a lot like the football-sized rocks. And counting them is actually quite difficult. And the best that we've been able to do for decades and decades is essentially strap someone to the side of a helicopter and fly a helicopter around and take like a lot of photos of the colony. And this doesn't work very well. It takes a couple of days. You get inconsistent photo quality. Penguins look like rocks. The images are hard to stitch together. And so this team has kind of been racking their brain because it's actually been a pretty big problem for a long time, and has sort of been holding back their ability to do science and to inform conservation of the ecosystem. And so what they were able to do is they partnered with a with a team at Stanford University, a robotics lab there, to essentially address some of these barriers to the use of drones, in order to make them a more useful tool for taking imagery of large spatial scales. And so, led by a graduate student named Kunal Shah, Kunal created a software, essentially a set of algorithms to plan very efficient flight paths for drones, such that an entire sort of area or entire polygon is able to sort of be photographed or be captured kind of one image at a time, in the sort of most efficiently, kind of optimized way. And then these images are then sort of very much easier to sort of stitch together with automated software. And they were successful. And so here's a picture of the colony. It's about 2 square kilometers. And they essentially were able to cut the survey time from 2 days down to 3 hours, and do so successfully. And so essentially, when you sort of create this with this algorithm, you pre-program the flight paths into the drones, and then you still have pilots flying each drone individually in case they need to sort of step in and manually override anything. But the process does happen sort of relatively quickly and efficiently. And there's a picture of the quadcopter drone up there in the upper right-hand corner. And so we had a lot of success using this in Antarctica, and got to thinking about whether or not we could use this similar technology to help us in rangeland ecosystems. And so we did. So this last summer, we did just that. We attempted just that. So our goal here was to advance the research and development of multiple drone systems as a tool for rangeland management. And we had 2 relatively simple objectives. And the first one is just, quite frankly, can we do this? So this oftentimes ranches are larger than the area that had previously been imaged, and so there is a sort of kind of scaling issue here. And then also it's a different landscape. You've got other kinds of challenges. You've got vegetation. You have certain characteristics of the land that might sort of inhibit the utility of this tool. So following this sort of first question of kind of can we even do this, a second question is can we do it, and is it going to be useful? And so can we evaluate these images in a way that they can accurately identify plants and vegetation communities at a level of detail that is valuable for land managers? So this last August, we surveyed a 2,000-acre ranch in Northern California, and using this novel algorithm that's the acronym is POPCORN, which essentially plans the paths for a team of aerial robots or drones to conduct these photographic surveys. Each drone, so we flew up to 4 drones at a time. Each drone was overseen by a human who is a FAA licensed UAV pilot, and then we also had additional team members on hand to watch for disturbance to wildlife and livestock. And here on the right-hand side, you can see the fleet of drones getting ready for launch. So just a little bit more detail about how we planned this. So we flew the ranch at essentially 2 different altitudes. We flew part of the ranch at a 55-meter altitude, which is going to give us a 1.4 centimeter pixel resolution. And the other half of the ranch, we flew a little bit higher, essentially just to evaluate these sort of trade-offs between detail and efficiency. And the final image mosaic that we got in the entire ranch was to a 1.6 centimeter pixel resolution. The images were stitched together using a software called Metashape, and it matches the images at the pixel level. And so a cool thing here is that it's actually able to create a 3D surface model from these detailed images. There's, I think, some potentially interesting questions that can arise from that. And so this picture that we see here on the right-hand side is essentially, it kind of looks like a bunch of, I'm not sure how clear you can see it on your computer screen, but it's sort of like a lot of blue spaghetti. And the upper part of the screen, the north half of the range, is essentially a little denser than the bottom half, showing that lower flying altitude for that upper part of the ranch. So in this next slide, I'll show you, this next slide gives just an example of what some of the individual flights look like. And so one of the not great things about this technology, sort of as it stands right now, is that batteries don't last very long. They're also sensitive to things like heat, and so they're a little bit temperature sensitive. So you know, overall flight time for an individual kind of battery run is less than 20 minutes, and so there's a lot of so essentially to do one of these surveys, you have individual drones sort of picking up and taking off. And coming back to the sort of pilot station, which is that yellow star, and getting the batteries changed out. So logistically, I'd say that this is not exactly easy just yet, but definitely a sort of early sort of step in the research and development process. And so along the way, we're sort of identifying opportunities and ways that you know, that can make this a more efficient survey method. So I'll show you just a couple of examples of the images. So this one on the left is essentially an example of a sort of, you know, single image that is taken. And then when we compile these images together, and given the degree of overlap and the way in which the images are stitched together, in addition to a sort of mosaic photographic image of the entire ranch, we're also able to create this 3D surface model. And I think that there could be, and so this essentially behaves not unlike a sort of LiDAR kind of surface model. And so I think that there are some interesting applications of that potentially down the road. In terms of sort of scaling the mosaic image up, or sort of aggregating all of these images together, in total, our survey time was about, I think our total survey time was about 12 hours, but spread out over 3 days. And it totaled about 17,942 survey images taken. An interesting sort of challenge that we ran into was actually for the portion of the ranch that we flew at that lower elevation, that 55-meter elevation. We actually, the Metashape software actually failed to stitch some of these images together in places where there wasn't contrast in the vegetation. So in these places that were sort of fully forested, you can kind of see in some of those dark green regions of the ranch that were fully forested, that the images weren't able to sort of rectify or to stitch together. And that actually has to do, we think, because you know, it's a little bit breezy and the trees move around a little bit. And so, the lack of strong contrast and that little bit of inconsistency in the tree movement essentially made that sort of not easy to answer, not easy to solve. But being at a slightly higher elevation sort of made things a little bit less specific, so that the software could actually answer that and stitch those images together. So that was a little bit of an unexpected result, or unexpected trade-off there. When we get down to sort of like looking at some of the specific detail within the ranch, we can really start to see, oops, no, I advanced too quick. We can really start to see just how much detail some of these images can give us. And so here's essentially a sort of nested example kind of at the edge of the herd. And so we can see in this bottom right-hand picture, the sort of edge of the herd, a couple of cattle there, and then we can kind of zoom that image in a couple of times. And so we can get an appreciation for, you know, where that pixel resolution kind of, you know, sort of starts to, starts to be visible at a pretty small spatial scale. So overall, this first objective, in terms of, you know, can we do this? You know, with a couple of exceptions, we did, you know, we were successful in sort of creating this whole mosaic image. We think that this will, you know, at least at minimum, sort of qualitatively be useful for ranch planning, for tracking changes in vegetation that can then be, you know, sort of remapped and used as a reference in the future. The current tasks that we're working on right now is a more quantitative classification of the pixels in order to classify vegetation and ground cover, and also to explore a couple of different applications of image classification. And then we're going to resurvey the ranch later on this spring. We're estimating it about April, hoping that that's around peak growth, with the goals of increasing survey efficiency and also getting a mosaic image at this different time of the year when we've got, for example, wildflowers in bloom, and forage in its sort of peak period of growth. Looking forward, I do think that this is a sort of early step in evaluating the potential utility for this kind of a tool for management. And there's also some potential research applications in the future that could be of interest. So in the future or going forward, I think this question or this pursuit of optimizing this method to scale it as a tool for things like grazing planning, post-fire recovery planning, and other kinds of management. And then also from the research perspective, the potential to attach other kinds of payloads to the drones. So we're using right now just, these drones are attached with cameras, and they're taking, sort of the standard RBG photos. There is the potential to attach, other kinds of image capturing tools, and also things like trace gas sensors to the drones. So those are a couple of the places where this could head in the future. But for now, or I guess, sort of in this first step, we were able to successfully survey an entire, couple thousand acre ranch in a few days, and we are excited to see how this information can be useful for the managers. And I'll try to end here. I'm not sure if this is going to work over Zoom, but I'll try to end here with just a little clip of one of the drones coming in for landing. There we go. That's the drone landing. And that's the pilot. All right. And that's it. And so I think I maybe have a little bit of time, and happy to take any questions or any feedback.
You do, and Libby, we have some questions in the chat. If anybody wants to ask a question live, you can feel free to unmute yourself. There's a little spot where you can raise your hand in it under reactions, like what mine has. So if you want to ask a question live, but otherwise I'll start off. One question is, what would a survey like this cost? And somebody else also asked if it was for sale, if the software is for sale.
Those are great questions. So, so in terms of the cost of the survey, I don't actually have like a sort of cost to attach to it. I think that this is kind of like in the sort of research, sort of like early kind of research stage for this. Generally what we try to do, it's our general intention with, with software and these kinds of developments to make them freely available. The specific route planning software that was used in this, I will defer people to our collaborators at Stanford. I did include a link to the science robotics paper that Kunal published, and I'm happy to drop that in the chat for people who are interested. I'm also happy to put them in touch with Kunal in the lab for that route planning software. I think and I'll say too that if anyone's interested in, if anyone is, sort of using like, doing anything with drones themselves and, would like to sort of, kind of take from any of these ideas, I'm, very happy to follow up and to sort of share, anything that we can that would be useful to that end. Oh, and I think, Teresa, I think you might be muted. There we go.
Yeah, I thought I unmuted myself earlier. Mr. Horney, Dr. Horney asks, I'm curious about the relative trade-offs between using multiple quadricopters with limited range versus single higher quality aircraft with much greater image, or much greater range. And that is above my knowledge and probably most of us here. So Libby, inform us, please.
Yeah, no, totally, absolutely. So So I think this is a great question. So let's see here. There is, well, I can speak to the sort of quadcopter as opposed to like in terms of a like you know, a UAV sort of a thing. One of the reasons why we, well, I mean, like I'll say quite frankly, one of the reasons why we're using quadcopters on this rangeland project is because, you know, quite frankly, we had them. You know, there is, I believe, some evidence showing that that the rotary style drone is less disturbing to wildlife than like a fixed wing a drone. And also there can be some benefits to, like, you know, takeoff and landing and things like that. You can take off and land from sort of tricky places. You know, in terms of trade-offs in the quality of the data, you know, I mean, I think, you know, so, you know, with a fixed wing vehicle, you can, you know, keep them in the air for longer and battery life better and all that sort of thing. And I think that is also a good point. And I think that, you know, both the sort of wildlife potential for this being a little bit more wildlife friendly, and also, you know, not requiring sort of specifications within takeoff and landing is probably, you know, it's sort of what led us in this direction, but might not be, you know, what someone else might not be the decision that someone else would make in a similar circumstance.
Okay. I think we probably have time for at least one more. So there's a question, a few of them I think asking, what process and software will you use for image classification?
That's a great question. Yeah, so in that one, I don't have the best answer for. So you know, sort of, let's see here, we have partnered with, in the Antarctica work, we have partnered with another group who is doing some of the image processing, and their name is escaping me right now, but I'd be happy to follow up with that. And then we also are experimenting with developing some of our own image classification techniques too, and I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that as a follow-up.
Okay, so maybe one more. Couple of things I've been seeing is relatively cost. Do you have an idea of how much roughly this would cost to do? So
the cost piece gets broken down. So I don't have a total dollar amount. The cost piece is broken down essentially into the cost of the drones themselves, and then the sort of, you know, person hours to fly them. I believe that our drones, I believe that the drones themselves with cameras are probably about $7,000. That's a pretty rough estimate each. And so yeah, I'll sort of put that out there. You know, you can get drones for a lot less. You can get drones for a lot more. So that's sort of a, you know, kind of a little bit of a sort of middle ground in terms of cost. And then, you know, person hours is basically, you know, sort of how big of an area do you want to try to image?
1 minute more, Teresa.
Thank you, Karen. Maybe really quick, Dr. Ford asked, how did it go identifying and quantifying individual species of grassland herbaceous plants?
Yeah, I'm really, really glad you asked that one. Okay, so this is the question that I'm getting like super excited about. So given that our first survey was done in August, the kinds of things that we were interested in, we were a little bit sort of less optimistic that we could identify individual species of grass. You know, things like quantifying bare ground is something that has been, I think can be possible from this. This particular area of land that we're imaging has like essentially, you know, very little bare ground and very high RDM. One of the reasons why we're very excited to redo this survey again in the spring is to try to get at some of these questions around plant functional groups and species ID. I mean, even things like, you know, identifying the sort of extent and coverage of like wildflower blooms, I think could be, I think that there can be some really neat applications there, but also of other plant functional groups too. So that's definitely sort of work to come in the next iteration. Thanks for asking that question.